Yeah.
You say that the record industry launched something like 17,000 lawsuits?
More than that.
More than that
Yeah.
now. Okay. Isn't there a case to be made that if they had not launched these lawsuits, then the record industry would have lost even more revenue than it has already lost?
Well, I don't see the evidence
Isn't it acting as a deterrent to some extent?
Well, if it were a deterrent, we would see a substantial or important change in the actual amount of peer-to-peer file sharing that's happening. And we don't see that. We see peer-to-peer file sharing continuing to grow. Where we've seen the industry succeed, it's by competing against peer-to-peer file sharing. Mm-hmm. And they've succeeded in lots of contexts in competing well. So, people go out. iTunes is the most successful platform for selling digital music right now. Mm-hmm. It does it even though every single song that you pay 99 cents for on iTunes, you could in 10 clicks get for free on a peer-to-peer file sharing system. But people want the convenience and they want to be able to do what's right easily, as long as you make it easy for them to do what's right. So the idea that it's a successful war because people have been stopping the willingness to peer-to-peer file sharing, I don't think it's supported by the evidence.
So which side of the war is Comedy Central on? They're owned by Viacom, aren't they?
Yeah. So it's a good question because in the case that Viacom has brought against YouTube, Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert have both been called as witnesses by Google because both of them took the position that this was crazy. They were happy with people sharing their work because the more people that get shared, the more people that get brought in to watch the show. Now, I think Viacom, in that case, as a company, actually has a fair claim. Viacom's claim is, it's one thing for you to take a Stephen Colbert show and remix it. And they've said that if you remix Stephen Colbert, they're not going to go after you. And they're not going to tell YouTube to take down any remix. What they're against is somebody taking a whole Stephen Colbert episode, and instead of having it on the Comedy Central website, it's going to be on YouTube. So they want people to watch it on the Comedy website. I have no problem with that. But again, the problem that's launched the war is not the YouTube issue. The problem that launched the war is peer-to-peer file sharing. And that activity, as Microsoft concluded many years ago when they talked about the darknet, that activity is not going to be stopped by lawyers. So if it's not going to be stopped by lawyers, let's just figure out another way to make sure artists get compensated and stop trying to stop an activity that can't be stopped by lawyers.
So you're not saying let's just decriminalize file sharing. You're saying let's find some way where people can still file share, but the artists get paid.
Well, I want to decriminalize file sharing. I want to make sure artists get compensated. And
but it's both. It's not either or.
That's right. I want to get both. The artists out there have been pushing, or the recording industry has been pushing for a way for them to get compensated and criminalizing file sharing. I see no reason to have that. Why not get rid of the criminalization and also find a way for them to be compensated?
So you're not saying let the kids walk into Brooks Brothers and steal as many ties as they want and it's okay?
No.
That's
no.
not...
And again, there's a very big difference between taking the ties and... but, in the last book that I did, Free Culture, I had this... this point, which just shows something about the extremism of the current war. According to the RIAA, if you go and take a album by Madonna and a CD by Madonna and you download all, like say 12 tracks, it could be up to $1 million in damages that they claim you're liable for because of that peer-to-peer file sharing of that music. If you walk into, well, if there were a Tower Records, whoever sells that in physical space right now, and you take it and walk out, according to the law of California, you're guilty of a second-class misdemeanor, right? So now the difference between that is that if I download it off of a peer-to-peer file sharing system, arguably Madonna is not worse off at all, right? There's not one less CD out there for them to sell, and maybe not I would have bought it, and even if I would have bought it, maybe other people hear it because of me and other people want to buy it too. But if you take it out of the Tower Records, or you take it out of the Walmart or whoever has it for sale, then there's one less CD to buy. So they actually are harmed by that. And that's the key difference between intellectual property as it exists in digital form and property as it exists in a physical form.
Let's talk about the role of the Congress a little bit. What kind of laws are they passing and why don't they help?
Well, Congress is passing laws that the industry demands to make it easier for them to prosecute or to enforce rights that they believe should be enforced under the system. Congress has not once in this 10-year war stopped to ask, is this worth waging? This war worth waging? Are there other ways to achieve this objective without increasing the penalties and increasing the ability to be suing our kids? So that's because Congress doesn't even get that there's another side to this issue, right? So, so my criticism of Congress is that Congress is so focused on what they can do to make this enormously important source of campaign revenue happy, that they don't all think about what actually makes sense from a public policy perspective. So that's the criticism of Congress.
You said something in the book about congressional laws can't be written like a wiki. And I want to challenge you on that. If NASA can hire amateur astronomers to map out craters on Mars, and if open source software can be done by amateur software programmers, why can't congressional laws be written by mass participation? And do you really think we would have passed so many ridiculous laws if there was mass participation in those laws?
Yeah, you're right and fair to identify me as a skeptic about kind of direct democracy, especially direct democracy through a wiki. But the reason for that is that I think that the incentives of the people who are playing the game of writing legislation are different and more complicated and more strategic than the incentives of people who are going to sit down and map out the craters on Mars, right? Of course, I could go and screw up the Mars mapping project by marking things that aren't craters and by erasing things that were craters, right? But why would I do it? What's my interest? You know, I'd be kind of a weirdo. And of course, if I did that, they would correct it easily enough. But you know, if you put up the tax code and you said we could change it by wiki, a lot of rich people would hire a lot of lawyers to go in there and do whatever they could to cause whatever trouble they can to make sure that they don't have to pay taxes anymore. And they would be better able to do that than the average person because they're more sophisticated in their ability to engage the system. So that fact, I think, changes the context. You know, there are places where it's plausible and reasonable to believe you have a union of interests, but places where there really are conflicts of interest, and that's why we need a government that reflects in a representative way upon what the right thing to do is. So I don't believe in direct democracy. I believe in representative democracy. And I think our representative democracy is corrupted because the representatives focus all of their energy on how do they raise money to get to office rather than what makes sense for their constituents.